Can I create another Zoom meeting for you?
So another just small for your information as planning commissioners and members of the community to help us share out and kind of project the message and the work going on. And you can access these on our website on the discussions map through the mapping department and all of these layers. But these first target blocks that we're going to be working on this summer, we'll get those swift care crews between CMC, Newmont, and county lands. We'll hit around the CMC campus, as well as the community field area. And then we're working with the Colorado State Forest Service, who's writing additional funding. And they have the ability through a good neighbor agreement with the U.S. Forest Service. These outlying purple areas are other BLM and U.S. Forest Service lands. And those surround our subdivisions and private lands. So we're gonna incorporate that. We hope to look at doing more work on this right of way project on 17 and County Road 4. And then what's also happening this summer is this area here. Howard would be interested in this and helping me reach out to Twin Lakes Estates here. But this is a county open space parcel. We're going to use this as a demonstration project for what we hope to do along the rest of the County Road 4 and County Road 17 right-of-way thinning, so that people can see just what we're talking about. There was some resistance back in 2014, and so we want to avoid that. I think in general, the kind of social buy-in of projects like that is probably very different today than it was. And some of our partners are also doing a lot of work around Mountain View Village, East and West, and Grand Lakes Estates. So that's some other really beneficial work for our Mountain View Village community, and then doing work within Grand Lakes Estates to kind of create that break there. But
and Sarah, could you share with the Planning Commission where a lot of that funding has come from?
Yeah. The state, the COSWAP, the Colorado Strategic Wildfire Action Plan or Program. Thanks, Commissioner Feeder. Is an opportunity that came up in our partners with ARWIC or Arkansas River Watershed Collaborative, the Arkansas River Basin, and our roundtable worked with Colorado State Forest Service to write that grant. We were awarded the 25 weeks of funding, which is Department of Corrections with their crews. And they do a really great job on the ground, and they'll be here for 25 weeks as long as they're not pulled away in some other area. But the 25 weeks is committed, so whether or not we can have that all happen this summer or this season, if they get pulled away after 5 weeks of work, we still have 20 weeks left. So they'll come back as they can and get that work done. Other opportunities we have through the natural resource damages funding and the 3.9 million that we got, with 3 different categories included in there of fuel mitigation, culvert replacement, and fish passage, river work and water quality work, and mine mitigation continued, which is work that's been done over the last 20 years in the county with these funds. And the trustee council, part of the AG's office at the state, created a different process to do that. And so all the partners that have been doing work in Lake County got together and created a proposal with those 3 categories, including fuel mitigation. So there'll be some work continued on Newmont mining, potentially up in our watershed, to protect our watershed, as well as other assets in California Village and across the county. And then COSWAP has another opportunity coming that's due on Wednesday for actual dollars. We have a chance to be awarded $500,000 to expand that scope I just showed you and move up into the northern part of the county as well, where there's a really high risk of wildfire. Come on in. In the middle here, you saved a seat. around Homestake, Piney and Sylvan Lake subdivision. So hopefully doing some work in those properties in those areas as well.
Awesome. That's really exciting to have that kind of funding coming into the community to carve out all of that mitigation work. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's really great. It's really great. And kudos to Bryce. There's not here because picture is worth 1,000 words. And when we shared all those layers, some of those, just that the county owned alone, and then the FCC and Newmont and the potential and some larger landowners, and a handful of them are already in forest management plans with Colorado State Forest Service. And so it just got a lot of folks and partners realizing the opportunities here in Lake County and a lot of attention. So very grateful for his work on that.
So we have just been doing a few updates. Sarah gave us some wildfire planning updates and work, and some exciting news about funding opportunities. And so I think we are ready to turn things over to you. We have we tabled the approval of minutes, and so we're at new business.
Can I ask a follow-up question for the wildfire?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm sorry if I missed this while I was like gathering all this up. What the 10-year plan, like you say, like what the whole count, like county-wide sort of cost estimate, and then sort of the county estimated.
Yeah.
portion?
So by 2033 to reduce the risk of wildfire, all these numbers are like jumbling in my head now. I think, but do you remember?
I can't remember the risk reduction number. I just remember that there's sort of that curve of like cost effectiveness.
Yeah,
and you start
yeah.
getting less
Well,
return on the money. So we sort of,
I mean, that's kind of crazy because it's like a $20 to $40 million ideal scenario of expenditures
Yeah.
on serious impact.
yeah, over 10 years.
Over 10 years.
And about a quarter of that the acreage, about a quarter of that is on sort of non-federal.
Right. Yeah. So Bryce is working on multiple additional layers to the discussions map, but one of those is some of the new mapping that came out of the CWPP planning that has that caught like the biggest bang for your buck. If you only have 10 million, where's the hottest spots to target for the best return for your investment? If you have 20 million, it would be in orange, and 40 million is in yellow. And a lot of that 10 million sits on Forest Service land. And a lot of the areas that we're targeting are in that 20 to 40 million, like not necessarily the highest, although the neighborhoods in the northernmost part of the county are the pretty dangerous and at high risk because of the forest, and also the risk of the pattern of or the habit of fire coming in from Eagle County as well. But you have to go where you get the funding, where you have a lot of partners that are in private land members that are willing to. I mean, the WUI, the wildland urban interface around the city of Leadville is super important, and that's particularly exciting for the projects happening this summer, and probably ongoing, building that relationship with CMC and WUI. 4 and 17, protecting the surrounding areas or the subdivisions by treating the surrounding areas.
Yeah, no, of course. To me, it's like, it's a big deal that we're going to keep doing for a decade or more.
Yeah.
And there's lots of state and federal funding out there to capture, but it's still going to be even on the county or sort of private land portion. It's like $1 million a year.
Yeah.
Like year on year.
Yeah, it's a big investment. And our WIC, our partner, they've been integral in getting those funds so far, and they are looking to add a staff person just to manage those projects in Lake County. And so we have kind of, communicated through Tim and back to the board of needing to schedule a conversation to, and I think it is scheduled, to talk about, what that might mean in partnership with RWIC and what they envision that staff person doing and how we can support that.
No, that's great. It's super important stuff.
Nice to see you.
Thanks.
I almost forgot that it was in person. I just saw with you. So Anne reminded me. Okay, well, we have file 22-06, which is 301 Tabor Drive, and that's the subdivision exemption for the Hudson minor subdivision. And if we recall, Ian kind of gave us a briefing on this a few weeks ago, but I will turn it over to you to remind us what's.
Awesome. So yes, this property was part of, I put up on the screen, the minor subdivision, which was platted September 14th, 2006, whereby lot 1 and lot 2 were created. And through the subdivision process, a shared well was contemplated as the water supply plan for this subdivision. Today's planning practices, we would not look to encourage this kind of scenario. Largely, it creates ownership issues. It creates kind of a litany of different issues, and they're not, recommended by the Division of Water Resources. However, this was done, in a different time. But through that shared well, this property was subdivided. Then there were a series of errors that occurred after this platting. So the property was first going to, there's a plat note on the plat. I don't think I can make it big enough that anybody's going to be able to see it. But there was a plat note, and I'm going to try, I don't think, to make that big enough for you to be able to see it. But it contemplated using a well permit number that was the incorrect well permit number. And so that well referred to a well that was located on a different parcel entirely. And it was never caught through the division's review of the approval of this, nor land use staff or the county at the time of the division. So what actually ended up happening is that this parcel was granted a well permit for a single in-house use well. And so when that happened, that they could no longer be in obviously a situation of being able to share their well with lot 2. The applicant on this application owns lot 2. And so they were also in a position that this parcel could not also acquire a well permit either for lot 2. So they've been put into a situation that because of these series of errors, and I'm kind of simplifying this. So if the applicant's representative or the applicant would like to speak in greater detail about it, I welcome that. But I'm just kind of dialing it down into the very basic outcome. They are seeking from the Board of County Commissioners and the Planning Commission consideration under the statutory ability pursuant to Colorado statute. Let me see if I can find it really quick. It's not. Colorado Revised Statute 30/28/101/10D, whereby the board can consider exempting certain situations that do not fall into subdivision. It is not meant to circumvent subdivision, but it does create kind of a safety relief valve when we find ourselves in situations that potentially errors have been made. And this will allow the applicant to apply to the Division of Water Resources and receive an in-house use well to serve lot 2. This application was reviewed and sent to the Division of Water Resources, who are actually suggesting this is a solution as well. So this is supported by the division to go this route and to exercise that option. So I would just ask if any of the members of the Planning Commission or board have any questions for me about the staff report or any details. And if not, I'd be happy to introduce the applicant.
Yeah, I know this is kind of a complex issue. Maybe a few of us have dealt with this before, but Planning Commission members, does everybody kind of understand what's going on here and how this came to be? Okay, everybody feels pretty confident they know kind of where it's what's happening. Okay. Does anybody have any questions for Anne before we introduce that?
Okay, super. So we have representative for the applicant, Emily Pooley, and we also have the applicant, Jared Taylor, and I believe Jared to go by Jed Taylor. And so I would introduce both of you and open the floor. Like I said, I've kind of made this very simplistic in the presentation by staff, and if you would like to add more detail, please feel free to do so.
I'll go ahead and pipe in really quick, Jed. First, thank you all for considering our application. I just want to reiterate, this is an application for an exempt well permit on the Taylor's property. It's been a very long process to get here, and we've tried to work collaboratively with the neighbor, but that met a dead end just because of well regulations and restrictions. Excuse me. We also tried to find additional augmentation sources that might be available in the area. The only potential option really was using the blanket augmentation plan that Lake County obtained several years ago. That's not yet up and running, so we keep running into these roadblocks, these dead ends. We've landed and had the great opportunity to do this application for a subdivision exemption. Just in hopes that the Planning Commission and the board, excuse me, would be an understanding of the current situation. I know it's a little funky, and we're just trying to correct some of those errors so that the Taylors can build a house on their property and it doesn't remain sterilized.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Jed, did you have something you wanted to add as well?
No, I don't think so. I think Ann and Emily did a great job putting that stuff together. I just will say thanks for taking a look at it. It has been kind of a long process, and we're looking forward to some sort of solution. So thanks for looking at it. But no, I think they've done a great job of speccing everything out as is.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, one thing that maybe not a lot of everybody knows too is, so that parcel before subdivided would have been allowed to have a domestic well, which is quite a bit of water use. So putting that down onto 2 in-house use wells is probably less impact than the original use that would have been created for that parcel. So it feels pretty good to me. Does anybody have any questions?
The only thing that I would mention too is that because sometimes when we are doing this, we require a new plat, but because this has already been platted, I believe we could just do this by resolution. And so it will, again, make it a little bit simpler for the applicant and a little more fluid. So I think this can be done by resolution.
Would we need to amend the plat now?
Well,
So, I think that what we would do is, I think the best probably housekeeping would be to attach the resolution to the minor sub and record them again, put them on the record together again, and to create that, that better institutional memory of the change.
And did I need to do this whole, sorry. Okay, I went a little backwards on things. It's okay, because we didn't necessarily open up public comment yet. So I'm gonna read the subdivision exemption opening statement for a public hearing. The Lake County Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners are conducting a joint public hearing. This statement I'm reading shall be incorporated into and made part of the record on these proceedings. The Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners have jurisdiction to conduct a joint public hearing on the subdivision exemption under 3.18 of the Lake County Land Development Code. The purpose of this hearing is to consider whether the proposed exemption should be approved. In considering that matter, the Commission will consider CRS 30-28-101, Section 10D, which gives the Board of County Commissioners the authority to exempt certain divisions of land if the board determines that such division is not with the purposes of subdivision. The procedure to be followed in this hearing will be as followed. Members of the commission and/or board will disclose if they have any ex parte communications. County staff makes their presentation. The applicant will then make any presentation they would like. After that, we will entertain any persons that either support or oppose the application to present evidence. Supporting and opposing witnesses may be questioned by the commission and the board. Once questioning is concluded, no further questioning is permitted unless granted by the chair. The applicant may then present any rebuttal evidence. The parties and witnesses are asked not to submit redundant, irrelevant, or cumulative evidence. If someone has already made a point that you wish to make, please simply say so. The chair will also require that all comments be made to the planning commission and the board, and that there will be no dialogue between the applicant and members of the audience. At the conclusion of the evidentiary portion of the hearing, the chair will entertain a motion to close the evidentiary portion of the hearing, and the commission will discuss and weigh the evidence. Then there will be a motion to close the discussion phase of the joint public hearing. The Board of County Commissioners will then leave the meeting, and the chair of the Planning Commission will entertain a motion on the application. The motion may take the form of one of the following recommendations. 1, approve the application with no conditions. 2, approve the application with conditions. Or 3, deny the application. The planning director shall make a record of any substantial discussion on the motion and include that in the record with the recommendation of the commission. The commission's recommendation will be in the form of a statement of motion. Are there any objections to the jurisdiction of the commission or to the form or substance of these proceedings? Hearing none, I will now ask each planning commissioner and/or county commissioner if you've had any ex parte communications to disclose those now.
For me,
Okay, hearing none. We've already gotten our staff and applicant application or presentation done. Do we have any members of the public wishing to speak on this matter? If so, feel free to either unmute yourself or raise your hand. Okay, I don't see anybody. At this time, if there are no further questions by planning commission or county commissioners, we can entertain a motion to close public hearing.
I'd make a motion that we close the public portion of this hearing.
I second that motion.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and roll call vote, just because we're in so many different places right now. I'm having a hard time knowing who's here, who's not. An aye or a nay on the motion, please. Howard Tritz. Abby Dahlman. Bryce is not here. Joey Edwards.
Aye.
Lupe Bobadilla.
Aye.
And Jamie Cipher.
Aye.
And Heather Lindh, aye. I guess I would make a recommendation, since the commissioners are here and probably have some input on our next several files here, that the planning commission tables the discussion portion of this file to end of meeting so that the commissioners can stay in the room for these next few discussion items, and we can revisit this conversation at that time. Does that work?
Works for me.
Okay,
yeah, I'm happy. I mean, I'll just go to my office and kind of
We can
look
call
at
you
this
back.
stuff if you want to respect the time of the applicants.
sure, we can do that.
Yeah.
Okay, our county commissioners are opting to leave the room for a few minutes while we finish this up, and then we'll call them back in.
Jared, I just want to say, I would love to talk with you about field litigation and your participation in your parcel.
Yes.
So Heather, I would just mention that there are 3 motions, model motions in the staff report, 1 for approval, 1 for conditions, if anyone had any conditions, and 1 for denial. So they are the last pages 4, 5, and 6 are the suggested motions.
Do any of the planning commission members wish to discuss anything, or does anybody have a motion that they would like to make?
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, at the moment, I don't have anything to add or any questions that I have about this hearing. And so I'm ready when folks are ready to move forward with a recommendation.
Yeah, if somebody has the sheets in front of them and feels comfortable reading the suggested motion of approval, they can do that, absolutely.
Go ahead, Lupe.
Thank you so much, Joey. I have it available. So I'm recommending motion for approval. And so with that, I move the Planning Commission recommend approval of file number 22-06, the exemption form from subdivision regulations of Lot 2 of the Hudson Minor subdivision recorded on September 14, 2006 at reception number 344189 to the Board of County Commissioners, and that the resolution be prepared to memorialize the decision making the following findings. 1, the inclusion of plat number 10 on the Hudson Minor subdivision plat recorded on September 14, 2006 at a reception number 344189 was in error. 2, the proposal within the purposes of CRS Part 1 of Article 28 of Title 30 and should be exempted from the term subdivision and subdivided land pursuant to CRS 30-28-101 10D. 3, the intended purpose of the rules and requirements of the Lake County Land Development Code are valid, and this proposal should be exempted from the relevant requirements. 4, the proposal is within the best interests of health, safety, and general welfare of the general public. 5, the proposal is consistent with the goals, objectives, policies, and other provisions of the Lake County Comprehensive Plan. 6, the proposal complies with the Lake County Lab Development Code and other applicable codes and regulations adopted by Lake County.
I'll second that motion.
Any discussion on the motion? Okay. I will go through roll call quick. Lupe Bobadilla.
Aye.
Joey Edwards.
Aye.
Jamie Seifert.
Aye.
Chair Lindh. Aye. Great, motion carries, and the recommendation will be made to the county commissioners for their next meeting, I would say,
Monday the 16th.
Monday the 16th. Thank you, applicants, for stopping by this evening. And we will go get our county commissioners, so we'll just take a super quick break before we move into the old business work session items.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, this is Jed. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, we have everybody back in the room here. We'll go ahead and move along on our old business to the work session on the LDC amendments. The first one being file 22-13, which is the affordable housing incentives that we wanted to put together in the PUD amendment.
So what we talked about last time was adding in affordable and workforce housing incentives. And so I've simply added in workforce in all definitions, also by virtue of one of the following, or a combination thereof, but a minimum of one. I don't see where you couldn't potentially have more in there. So the plan is that this week, Adjournment and I are going to work on a definition for workforce housing, but the basis being that we would also have an option that doesn't have an income qualifier to it. That it would just be, so it added in number 3, construction of deep restricted units as part of the overall development that meet the requirements of workforce housing. Generally, that would be whatever it would be, but the restriction would just address that. So this is basically just re-looking at what we talked about. And then this week, before the end of the week, I should be able to submit over a definition of workforce housing. And then I would welcome feedback from all parties if that's hitting the mark, or kind of where we think we are. And happy to hear any additional thoughts and concerns or input that anybody has that should continue to kind of, if there's wordsmithing or if there's bigger criteria or anything else that would help just make this more effective, or any questions about what's being proposed right now.
I had a couple of questions just on where you think you're going with the workforce housing incentive. Is that so? Is that it would be deed restricted to people who are part of the workforce, but it wouldn't have an income or appreciation cap necessarily. It would just be, and so it would be market within that carved out market. Okay.
Correct.
I mean, I guess the other thing I'm curious about, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to make last week, so sorry if this is over, but I'm just thinking about like all the different sizes and price ranges of housing that we need. I'm wondering if there could also be an element of just housing that is on the lower end of pure market rate. Because to me, we need subsidized, we need affordable, we need district, but there's also sort of potentially a gap in the inventory of more affordable but still market rate. And at least I would be willing to think about whether there's some more modest incentives you give to the developer for coming in with like multifamily units, like a row of studio apartments, just sort of fill a gap in the market rate available stuff.
Yep, and I think that's along the lines of where this conversation added workforce, because at least I feel pretty strongly in my job that affordable is not the only piece, and I guess it depends on who you're talking to as to what that affordable number is.
Sure.
AMI, right? And so I think that is really frustrating, but it's also, when you hear that Copper Mountain is going to build giant boutique hotels and more condos to sell, but no more employee housing, we continue to try to take on that burden of housing their employees, and not to say that those community members don't need to live here, for sure they do, but we're not taking care of our own employees, and that could be market rate people.
Mhm.
And that's, I think, where, I have more of a passion to be housing, making sure that our small businesses in our county and our schools can house our staff. I feel like that priority is almost more important to me than what income bracket they're in. And I guess my sense is also that if somebody builds a 40-unit apartment building or townhomes or what have you, and they have to fill those with Lake County employees, then their rates are going to match that. they have to fill them.
Yeah.
And so they're going to, by just pure economics, they're going to make sure that they can do so. And we just have, so so to me, this fit both pieces. It's like, well, if somebody comes to us with affordable thing, great. But what if somebody came to us that maybe doesn't have that lower than AMI, but they're going to house a whole bunch of teachers, and they're going to, because quite honestly, if the teachers get their pay raise, I think they're higher than our AMI, our 100% AMI. So, what does that turn into? So that's where, to me, if you have both, if you have developers coming to you for both, then you're kind of covering both of those gaps. I guess the only people you wouldn't be covering would be people who work out of town and our market rate, but
Yeah.
That gap that we don't have covered with those two definitions.
And again, I don't think we don't have a crystal ball about what gaps we need to fill, and if we do a short-term rental cap or try to less than the impact of second homeowners that are homes that are vacant. There's a lot of stuff we just don't know, so we don't know the right answer.
Right.
I think this is an important addition to make. I mean, it basically feels like we're just slightly broadening to whom we might choose to give incentives in the future to be a little less tied to some of these AMI numbers or other projects. So I think insofar as this is a messy problem that requires messy solutions, this is a good step to just broaden kind of what we're able to do. And I do think that it's important, that we consider each new project, whatever it may be. And even though this is something that will, like I said, broaden kind of what we're doing, we still have a choice as to what we invite here or what we work on first or second. And so I think just being cognizant of what the real needs are. Maybe it is all of a sudden there's a lot more teachers now that we've increased the minimum salary and they're all coming here and they need a place to live, and like, oh, great. If it's not, we don't have to, sacrifice anything insofar as our development of land in favor of affordable or not, just because that exists. We should be trying always to build housing for what we need as soon as possible, I think. But I think generally making our options broader is a good move.
And can I add a second thing, or I don't know if you find, and the other thing that sort of caught my eyes, I really like where this is going, but I put myself in the shoes of either like a property owner or developer or staff who has some of these initial discussions with property developers. I wonder if we could try to either sort of rank those bullets on sort of how much of an incentive we're willing to give, because I think some of them obviously the developer would legitimately ask for more incentive, or even, it's just too impossible given all the differences in different properties, but even try to quantify some range, how big an incentive would we ever give to someone? Because again, if I'm a developer reading this, I'm like, that sounds nice, but what are you really talking? And I hate to go down some some formula that's always going to be wrong.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, I think that is kind of relates to this conversation I've been having with Ann about 1041 and the expectation, not for including 1041s in the permitting, but sorry, it's more broad approach of sorry, let me back up. The 1041s lay out all these different criteria that I think are just a really great thing for us all to read and understand the expectations of what we want an applicant to answer, which I think are a little more specific than what we go through in conditional and plan use development, or maybe they're just more some of the conversations we've had. So all I'm trying to say is that those 4 bullets can fluctuate depending on how big the land is. I can imagine somebody coming in with a huge acreage, 5 units over here, and all this other space. So what does that mean for this application? And I guess all I'm trying to say is it would be great if we could all just think about what we individually think matters in all those bullets and how we might leverage or have the conversation to navigate any negotiation among ourselves, and like discuss with staff, send those questions to staff, talk to your fellow planning commissioners about like how we do that. I don't know that there's not an answer for like a formula, but I feel like it would be different circumstance. Yeah.
Jamie, you have your hand up.
Thanks. Just two quick thoughts. One is, I'm sure we're not the only community to deal with this. I'm sure there's a playbook or a spec out there for ranges, formulas, whatever, because there's a lot of things that could possibly happen. And I'm also just curious if the actual numbers matter for what we're doing here. And I'm asking out of ignorance here. I'm not sure if this conversation is to try and get some of this formula baked into the thing that we are approving, or if what is true is we're just working on this language right now. And then once it is approved or added or codified or whatever the term is, that when the next one of these comes in front of us or the board, that we will figure out the formula.
I think that's a great question. I think, what are you gonna say?
No, go ahead. Okay.
My follow-up to Sarah's point is that I think it would be I think what I almost like about this is my understanding with the PUD application was that we don't have to give anybody a variance. And so the whole thing is a negotiation. So depending on whether it be in 2 months or 2 years, our climate could be in totally different places, but this allows whoever's at the realm to say, we don't have to give you this. This is what we need. And it needs to fit in one of these. And I liked that they were specific enough to explain what we need as far as it being affordable or being workforce or being deed restricted or whatever that piece is, but it's also general enough to let people be creative, because I think the only way we're going to get developers to build what we want is for them to be able to be creative with, at least right this minute, with the cost of it all. So it's my personal thought would be that on a case-by-case basis, when somebody brings us an application, we're really ranking those individually in our minds, what's more important here. And we think if you provided us this, and sometimes that dialogue with that developer can work at just changing those priorities through the conversation, depending on what they can offer us. So my feeling would be less is more in this scenario, because I think you have to leave it general enough to allow there to be some really great opportunities that come up that we can't possibly think of.
I think it'd be really fun to play through a pilot case and like talk through all the things that we could potentially ask for as a group. Because we could say, great, it's broad, it's, when we get there, we'll negotiate. But I think then you get to the reality of like getting willing to be behind a table and facing an applicant and being like, oh, I don't know, like I haven't exercised this before. Which moon could I ask for?
So I would say that we've got some great tools already in place, because this negotiation, I would just encourage you that this is a code amendment that needs to be in place by May 23rd with the level of development that's going to be before us coming up. And so I think if we hesitate and we don't have this intentional statement so that applicants we've set the expectation that they need to come in willing to have this, then that development's going to come in regardless, and we won't be very well positioned. But this sets an expectation. I would also say it's intentionally vague because our needs and our landscape have changed, and we have the ability to negotiate. And I would say that we do, even though it's dated, we do have some housing needs. We've got the housing needs assessment. We have done quite a bit of looking into different things, and so I think that this at least drives those conversations and avoids the situation of not being prepared for them. This creates a space that also leaves, intentionally another, like number 6, where they can come up with their own proposal, something that they would like to propose as a solution. And so I think that we've set the stage a bit with what kind of things that we're looking for, and then it's intentionally vague or broad, not big, broad, in order to be able to engage, a lot of different levels, and potentially in some of the developments, not being specific to anyone, because this is just a legislative change, we're not talking about applications. But the size of developments that are potentially out there coming to talk to us in further discussions will be a lot of opportunity within there for some different discussions at some different levels that might be able to serve several different needs. And so, you may find that there's not just one answer in all of these, but this will kind of help form things. There was one other thing I was going to say, and I can't remember what it was. The other thing that I want everyone to know, because this is a new change that we are doing, is that we're creating a development review team, like a community development team. And so historically, when applicants came to meet with the county about development, they met with Paul and I, and then we relied on the referral process in order to get all the good information and help drive what needed to happen in the development. And sometimes that worked, and sometimes it didn't. That information at the last minute that would have been really beneficial. So now we are reaching out to all of the review agencies, creating a development team that's going to happen for the first time this Friday. And that includes right now Parkville Water, and we're hoping to engage with Leadville Sanitation as well. Get all the partners at the table happen and talking before they even apply. Also, we're creating a living document that's a development checklist. So right now we have an application checklist. So when you apply, we give you a list of things that you must have within your application. And now we're going to create a development application that we want the Planning Commission's voice in and the Board of County Commissioners. So before they ever come to hearing with you, you've highlighted and lifted up the things that are important for them to consider in their development. And we can change that. It'll be a living document that we can, as things come up, hey, we want that to be put into this resource for development that is giving the Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners a voice at the table to help developers have an idea of what is important and what kind of policies and plans are in the works that they should be mindful of. Also, we'll put on there things that are resources for development, like the EDC, and groups that our staff's role is not to be advocating or assisting in certain ways other than to help navigate the code. So we'll provide them for resources that can, help them from a different aspect. And so there's no, kind of misunderstanding that they developers come to staff looking for that kind of guidance. So we want to make sure that we're getting a lot of good information so that hopefully by the time that you're all considering applications, there's been a lot of good information given to them to help drive those conversations. So you don't find yourself in that like, would have, could have, should have, or it would have been great if they would have known, or this doesn't seem to fit what we even think about. So hopefully it'll just make this process a little stronger and more connected.
That's awesome. That's not good.
Okay. I come back with another. So, I mean, one thing I'd love to hear where Planning Commission and commissioners are, though, on this idea of like how big an incentive are we giving? Like, to me, like philosophically, I don't know where I stand on this myself. It's like, are we just trying to make developers whole? Like, if they build some stuff where they make less profit, are we trying to give them an incentive on a density bonus, say, that makes them whole? Or do we want the things in those bullets enough that we're actually willing to really make it active to seek that out? I mean, if we had a magic formula, would we give a 2-for-1 incentive to make them more than whole to really try to drive developers into doing?
Well,
Did that question make sense?
It
Like, it's like,
does.
how badly do we want this?
But I think it would also, I think I still go back to, it's gonna depend on the application and what they're offering, but in the incentives, remember, it's like, what does he need? So he or she, totally he or she. Do they want a height variance? Do they want crazy height variances? Well, how high are we willing to let them go? Maybe not 10 stories, so maybe we're not willing to go that far. Right, so it's mostly the incentives that they're looking at are what we can offer them are not financial. They turn into financial because their height or their density bonuses or
For
whatever
sure.
they are. But again, I think it's going to depend on where it is and what the request is from the
Yeah.
developer, right? And so if the developer, I'm guessing, that just like anybody, right? The developer is going to come to the table with this, we're going to give you this, but we want this. And that's when we come back and say, well, you want this big thing and you're giving us this little thing. How about we, and I think that that's where it's going to depend on what they're giving us and how valuable that is, as to how, at least me personally, how big I'm willing to, and what those impacts do, right? If it's in a spot where the impacts of higher density are really very minimal, then density away, in my opinion, to give us
Yeah,
what we need.
yeah.
But if it's in a place where density is going to be really impactful to infrastructure, to the surrounding properties, to any of that, then it's for amount of,
No, I mean, I agree with all that. I still think it would be good to try to give staff and the planning commission, like, a sense of like how badly we want this,
And with the fact that there are limitations, there's wetlands there, right.
Yeah.
So, I think that, I hear both of that, but I do think that, there's physical restraints, so I think the tone would be really important to know, yes, we're in a position where, it's critical, these things are critical, but again, I would hope kind of that living development checklist, or even if it's a check-in, I think even monthly or every couple months that we're checking in to just see where the climate is and what the housing inventory looks like and those kind of things. And now hopefully that we have a housing department, that'll help kind of, I think it's that kind of internal check-in to kind of see where things are at a little bit.
Judy Cypher, go ahead.
Thanks, Heather. I just want to say, Anne, I really appreciate the kind of explanation about kind of why the language was written as it was. And if really the only choice that we're making right now is, do we want to add this to our code to have options in the future? Then I think that's really the only thing that matters. We don't have to say yes to anything. We can just say no to everything. What it exactly we're doing and why we're doing it and how we're doing it, I think is an important conversation to have. But I think for right now, if what we're deciding is, do we add workforce in this clause to our code? The finer points don't super matter, and we should just have as many options as possible.
Well, so just to clarify, it's this whole section that's getting added. It's just that it was proposed last week as this whole section without the word workforce and things. So that's just what's been added this last week. So we're adding this whole new incentive program to the LDC.
Sure. No, I understand that. And my comment still stands. It's giving us options to maybe say yes to some things that people might ask of us later. And all of those, what will they ask and how will we decide? We're not obliged to do anything, but we are being more attractive to as many options as possible. And then it's up to us to yes or no or whatever.
Not sure.
Thank you. Joey Edwards, go ahead. Joey, can you hear us? Okay, we'll check back in with him in a minute. Can everybody else still hear us? Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, I just
okay.
thought I unmuted. I apologize.
No problem.
Ann's points are very valid. We are losing, and I'm watching us do this, we're losing talent and tenure every week right now in Lake County. I think it's very important that we keep the incentives Lake County specific and Lake County employment specific where possible, with incentives that we give to new developments or new developers. Those are my 2 cents. Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, I support the language and moving forward with that, as I understand it right now, but, and Jamie, I appreciate your kind of like maybe focusing and tracking us, but I just think with our experience in the past of going through PUDs and nor part of my experience with the city and the rail yard and not having these things in place or not having exercised that with the commission or, you know, a experienced council, I don't like it's great to get this language in, but I really I would love for everyone. I would love for us to like maybe throw a ton of ideas of alternates or incentives to Anne that she could put together and share with all of us so that we can like, well, what does that mean? Or what does this do? Or how far would the county want to go? I would also imagine maybe another layer between our joint planning commission and board of commissioner meetings. And then where we make a final decision, if there is some negotiation and incentive offered for us to speak with staff on like, okay, and really determine at what level we would be willing to subsidize. Because we can have county lands, we can do, I mean, and this is different, a little bit different. What we've talked about a lot more in the past is like open space. Negotiating
Open
tool.
space, density, lot line, lot,
Minimum lot size.
minimum lot size.
But I mean, like to like support a denser community negotiation of like, well, then we need less open space because we can't fit this. And it's just, we say, oh, okay, but there have been like thoughts of, well, okay, well, if you don't have the open space here, then where are you, either like, where's the payment in lieu of that? And is it toward a environment? You know, there can then be another menu of like what that would go towards. And one of those, obviously here would be workforce housing and what that would mean. But there are other like related things that some developers might really be like personally passionate about. We could, if they contributed to other open space areas so that it was like this credit for like other applicants or something. I don't know. But anyway, the 10, is there any way we could refer to the 1041 criteria and like submittal criteria or approval criteria in a process?
So 1041 is what, so you would have to, you have to make it one of your criteria to point to it. And then, or if you mean just extract it and amend your PUD process. But so that'd be a pretty deep dive. I mean, you know, if we want to, so I guess, are you saying, would you like some of the approval criteria in the 1041 that you think is absent in the PUD process?
Or at the very least, like everybody to read submittal criteria and approval criteria and just kind of get the juices flowing on other things that we could be really like nailing down and having a conversation with applicants on. Because there are some things like alternatives to this plan or proposal that you know, why here? Why does this work here in this location? And in most cases, it's going to be a water or sewer issue, but we do have that. We do have the residential development of 250 units plus in there.
So I want to back up just for a second and try to maybe simplify this just a little bit. If somebody came to us with just a standard subdivision application and they meet all the subdivision regulations that we currently have in our code, we've got to say yes. Correct. The only reason they wouldn't do that is because they want it. So they're going to ask for that variance. It's going to either be a lot, most of the time, I actually feel like it's more lot size changes or just bonuses that they're asking for. So they're going to come forward. Sometimes it's benefits, but so they're going to come to us and say, this is what, in order for us to make this development work, this is the variance we need. So the only thing I could think of that we could come up with to try to like predict what they're gonna ask for would be, what are the requirements that we have in during the major subdivision process that they're gonna ask for variances of? Because outside of that, we don't have the authority to give them variances to anything that's not codified. So it would just be those things that we could offer them incentives on. It's just to what extent. And I just have a really hard time wrapping my brain around how we would possibly decide what those incentives could be without knowing what the application is.
Yeah, yeah. I'm
And
sorry,
so
I think
it's-
I'm confused. I'm confused. Well, I'm not confused, but I'm like thinking about all alternatives and just being kind of inspired or thought provoking, the 1041 being thought provoking in, you know, what else and what other directions we could go in conversation.
And I think that that's where part two of this conversation, which actually probably is part one of a conversation that a developer has, is yes, once they're ready to make application to us, they've already got their plan figured out. They're like, so once the planning commission is involved, they already have done a lot of work on pre-planning their subdivision, what they want to do. So this language just guides them to say, well, you bet if you're asking for variances, you better have something for us to want to give you those variances for. But they're pretty much already come up with their plan. And yes, we can make them tweak it a little bit here and there. And that's kind of, to me, why I feel like this language is fine, because it's more of a general, okay, yeah, you've already got this plan. How can we change it to be exactly what we want it to be? But before that happens, they're going to come in and start talking to Ian in Ian's department. And that's where her pre-development packet is going to be super helpful, because that's going to be, where do we want to add additional things that maybe aren't these like codified things that we can offer variances from, but these are ideas, like you were mentioning county has land, or county maybe would do whatever. Those are like those pre-meeting stuff that like even Ann and I have talked about. You know, I have a couple people that maybe are interested in trying to pursue something here, but they would need partnership with the county or partnership with somebody to make the project work. That's, to me, totally different than this process, but it is something that, and they come in and talk to Ann and they're like, well, the only way we really want to make it this number, but the only way we could do that is if we got some sort of funding for water lines. Then that's where Ann can go, I wonder if the commission would be interested in that, having the conversation on the side. So to me, that pre-application period and that pre-conversation before this, the applicant has spent all their money designing the proposal that then comes to us in a PUD application, is where the most information and guidance needs is be given to staff. Does that make sense? Because by the time they've designed their plan and bringing it to us, it's kind of already not a done deal, because we could say no, but it's more of a plan that hopefully they've already worked through some of these other ideas that we've got, but this language really only applies to this part of the process. How do you feel about that?
Makes me want to add more conditions to our subdivision process, but
The conditions, I think, are strict enough that you'd be silly to be a developer not go through the PUD process.
well, and that came back to my, I mean, like if all we do in sort of our incentives in the PUD process is sort of make people whole, then they're going through a lot more around, you know, a lot more discussion and thinking with no actual big benefit over going through this standard subdivision.
Yeah, other than most of them need to do it anyway. So it
Yeah.
does a little more than make them whole.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
I agree. It's a good first step anyway, to see kind of where things progress. You know, and this is a great first summer to figure it out. You know, how do these hold up? How do people respond to them?
Mhm.
And then if we need to make adjustments. So if you're hoping to have this passed on the 23rd, that's our next meeting. Was your goal tonight that if there's any other recommended tweaks to this, we have them, and then you send out the workforce housing definition, everybody thinks that looks okay or gives feedback between here and the 23rd, so that we have a final draft to hopefully not have too much tearing apart on the 23rd so that we can just approve it on the 23rd.
That's the hope.
Recommend.
Yeah, that's the hope, to meet the development that is poised in that I believe we're going to anticipate this year. So yeah, that would be the hope, is that it's another definition, get feedback on that, as well as the draft, so that I hear from everyone on thoughts. And then again, remembering that, you know, the code is a living document that we can, but I think that we will miss an opportunity if we don't have it in there.
Have something going.
Yeah.
Okay, with that being said, does anybody have any changes they'd like to see in this existing before Anne sends out a workforce housing definition? Okay, Lupe, go ahead.
Just a quick question. So, and for the workforce definition, would you include also who would qualify it under for housing for workforce, or just what it just means?
So no, it would be a definition to drive, since we're gonna have community guidelines that are gonna be well vetted, that'll drive that. There'll have to be something in the definition that who that serves and you know what the criteria for that is within the definition.
Thank you.
Okay. Everybody feel good about moving on to the next? Okay, we have file 22-14, which is conditionally adding the ADUs to business zoning.
So I've gone through and made this what I think is a lot more simple than where I started. I'm not trying to, I think, reinvent the wheel a bit or over explain it. So what it would just say is that we would add ADUs to the business zone district where they currently are in other allowed districts. They're either conditional or a use by right. The threshold would be two different things. If an ADU is placed on under an acre, that's just like it is everywhere else in the code, it requires a conditional use permit. Additionally, if they want to do a more than one accessory dwelling unit in the business zone district, because it creates an environmental or housing needs solution, and a finding has to be made that that is actually the case. And so the only difference in adding this use in the business zone district would be that potentially you could have more than one ADU. Again, if a finding can be made that it checks those boxes. Otherwise, it tracks exactly like the use is everywhere else. Keeping in mind, so right here, typically, there's only one accessory dwelling unit allowed per parcel. But again, that would, in business zone district, there would be, this is a creative solution where we can find those solutions. They are still going to be under dimensional limitations. And an ADU or any property that wants to establish an ADU still has to meet all the dimensional limitations. They still have to meet setback, height, lot coverage, all of the other things. So it's not intending to over maximize a lot. It still has to meet the dimensional standards. It still has to have adequate water, sanitation, parking. It has to stay in single ownership. Otherwise, we're doing division of land. So it has to stay in single ownership. It has to meet dimensional standards. It has to have adequate facilities, water supply, sewer, electricity, fire protection, access, and covenant review. So it has to track with the covenants for the HOA. It has to have access. It has to have everything that an ADU has to have. It's just adding the use within the highest mixed use density that we have in the code, and potentially allowing more than one in the business, as long as all the other boxes check. And a finding can be made through the application that one of those two, either it's an environmental improvement or a social benefit through housing. The other thing is this has been referred so far to environmental health, and they came back and said, yes, this, especially in areas that don't have decentralized utilities, like the Village of Twin Lakes, they call this kind of a cottage cluster. scenario, and that it is a better fit than numerous septic systems on small lots. So we did get support back from environmental health, but they felt like a really good solution in areas like termites.
Just on that first sentence, ADU. Really have it as something.
Oh.
And maybe this isn't a conversation for tonight, and I had missed it before, but in our housing situations, one of my frustrations, especially with the city, has been the lack of ability to build ADUs. I think ADUs are a really awesome way to add units, and my experience with rentals is those are some of the best utilized rentals that this county can offer employees and housing. And the fact that our minimum lot size has to be an acre is kind of a bummer to me. I think that wells and septics regulated enough on their own that I actually don't think it should be an acre. I think if somebody has a little 1-bedroom basement that they want to rent out in matchless, then please do it. I also believe, and this will be part of our STR requirements, but our conversation, I believe that ADUs should not be allowed to be short-term rental, and I think that way that they are used for going towards our housing situation. So the 1 acre minimum to me everywhere is a bummer, and I think that's something that we as a county should reconsider for ADUs.
I think that's a little misunderstanding. It's a use by right if it's under an acre. It's
But then there's
conditional.
conditional use, yeah.
So you
Just
have,
a lot.
you just have to go through conditional use. If it's over an acre, or if it's under an acre, it requires a conditional use permit. So they're still allowed. You just have to go through the conditional use
If
permit.
it's over an acre.
If
You
it's
need to go,
under an acre,
you need to go through a CUP.
yes.
Yeah. If it's over an acre, you can just do it.
And I think the thought there is the sensitivity of dimensional standards to make sure that we don't, so there's just that extra layer, and that the impacts could be greater. If there's any to mitigate impacts, if
Just a big process. Like, it's almost like, couldn't you do more of a STR registration or something for an ADU, that's like, can you check these boxes? Can you confirm that you have water and that you're doing it within the lot line, and you are? Okay, great. Then you're registering it with us. As soon as there's problems, I don't know. It just seems like it could be easier and reduce. I just know of so many people who are doing, and who knows how long they've had them, and guaranteed they probably never had a conditional use permit or bought the house without one. So I don't know. It just it seems like something that we could look at, making an easier process somehow, but we don't necessarily have to dive into that with this as far as the business only, unless you feel like it would be something you change at the same time.
and we have a couple.
Oh yeah, Jamie Cyber, go ahead.
Thanks, Heather. Just a quick comment and then one quick question. I'm generally in favor of this. It sounds like it's an easy, quick way to add potential density. Like everyone's been saying, we need more units. I know that this has been done in many other communities because it is kind of easy, especially if a business has this space to do this. My one question, I think for staff, although if anybody else knows the answer, is roughly, let's say we do this, how many additional units are we likely to add in this particular way as the second or third ADU in a business zone thing? Are we going to add 10 units, 100 units, 1,000 units? Just trying to get orders of magnitude here for the actual effect, but generally in favor no matter what the number is.
So I think more during in response to that, I can talk about limitations. So I don't know if I can quantify, what kind of increase it would be. There's going to be limitations. So they're either going to be on centralized water, or if they're on an in-house use well, where certainly some of our business zoning is, then that's going to preclude them unless they can come in under the augmentation plan to be able to do anything. But they're going to have Water is going to be an obstacle for a lot of properties that are in the business zone district that don't either, I think we talked about this a little bit before, like a lot of the property owners in the village have very senior water that pre-exists before the exempt status of wells for in-house use only. So they'll be able to, there's certainly property owners there that will be able to have adequate water. But if you're not on centralized water, then you have to come under the augmentation plan or you're going to be limited. So there still are some barriers. Is it going to carve out hundreds of units? I don't believe so. There's too many barriers to it, but it may create some opportunity. And it also checks kind of a hope that we're finding better solutions in the village.
Jackie, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Well, I was just giving thumbs up for Anne. That was very well said. And she just totally said everything I was going to say. You know, this process is not really meant to create more barriers. It's to open up more options for some of those lots that are already facing water issues or septic system issues. So we've had in-depth conversations for years over how to deal with some of these lots and give them more options. And our recent conversations are that like cluster septic systems and these options that Anne is coming up with are really wonderful options that will hopefully allow more use of some of these properties. So good job, Anne. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. Do we have any other questions on or requested changes to the existing proposed language?
I don't, I have, how, I know you said more than one EDU in the business zone district would have to do. Is there, do we have to contemplate any thinking outside of 20 minutes or like on a big parcel or something, you know, at what point asked to do like 12 small like really not, I'm sorry, does also like usually we require that in reference to the primary dwelling or a size limitation and all that. That's not necessarily here. So we're referring to the business structure and what part of the business structure, like is that
Right.
questions like office space or garage space or
Smaller than the
just
primary
like
structure.
smaller than that primary structure.
So how I would, I think I'm answering the question.
I'm not asking it very well. So, you know, I'm just thinking out loud.
I think that you still generally have to consider, and I think that you have to kind of, is there a better use that's going to fall under? You know, are they going to be long-term occupied? Are they meant to be a different kind of model? Are they something different than accessory dwelling units? You know, and if they're not allowed to be short-term rentals, then they should be long-term. And I think that you would have to designate, you know, this is the primary, and these are the accessory. Even if it's just on the site plan, I do think you'd have to establish, but you could have, you could have a business use on this parcel. You could have I don't know, a restaurant.
Yeah, well,
And so if you're doing a conditional use permit anyway,
Yeah.
then it seems like you would do it for whatever your use is actually.
Not necessarily be doing it as a.
right.
You see what I'm saying? Like if you're doing
Sure.
a conditional use permit anyway, you would probably be like, well, I'm trying to do a group camp or whatever it is
Right.
that you're actually trying to do.
Well, that was going to be my question. If you don't think short-term rentals should be allowed, I can think of half a dozen scenarios where this help exactly that, short-term rentals. So how are we, like, if that is a use by right in the business area, and I don't know, the conversation here, I've not made my mind up yet, but in general, like, I actually don't think that short-term rentals should be prohibited for being. Or ADU should be prohibited for being short-term rentals, if only in owner-occupied properties. Like, I think owner-occupied properties should be able to do whatever they want with their short-term rentals. But, that being said, with the business portion, if it is an allowed use, to have a hotel or motel or some lodging, and that's what a short-term rental is, how would,
That'd be a CP for a hotel, motel, right? That would be.
or lodging.
Or a-
So it wouldn't be
There's
an
some
ADU
existing,
anymore.
there's some existing properties, and so, because it'll help the water and sewer issue, will they then have to submit for CP? They will, for.
If they're gonna have more than, if they're under an acre and have more than, yeah. Or they have an acre and they're gonna have more than just one.
And it's,
Okay.
and it's not just that, they're gonna have more than one, and there's some environmental or social impact that they are curing by doing so. So it's not just, I wanna have 5 ADUs on my lot, so I'm going through a conditional use permit. It's like, it's going to be for a social or environmental benefit. That's the language.
So, does that actually not address a couple of scenarios in Twin Lakes, where they could just say, well, I'm not gonna apply for this because I don't wanna jump through that hoop of then getting, like, with the residential allocated or assessed properties, then do commercial business?
No. I'm just saying the conditional use permit for the ADU. So you can still be, you're still assessed, if you have a house right now and you have an ADU in your backyard, you're still residential. You're not a commercial use. You may be in the business zone district, but you're still not zoned commercial, or you're not taxed, you're not assessed commercial.
What if there are a few small units
If you have a
that
house.
don't have a primary home, but then you decide to consolidate the lots to meet this
Somebody's gonna be the primary.
environmental, I guess that would be an environmental benefit,
Somebody's gonna be the
of-
primary.
being a cluster septic. Okay, so that hits that criteria of them being allowed to.
The only time they would go is when the property is being used commercially, is when they'll be assessed commercial. Zoning has nothing to do with it.
The change, we're not talking about a change in the lot size requirement.
No, we'll
Okay.
do that another day.
Okay.
Okay, we'll follow that at your,
But
I
Sarah,
think we
back to, sorry,
yeah, no, but
I'm back to your original question. I mean, your concern is sort of, I mean, I don't know if there exists a lot, what's happened, but if the lot's big enough that you could get a CUP for like, or the money is, I don't know, get a CUP thing to have like 12 ADUs. And it's like, what is that? Land
Yeah.
development. Shouldn't that just be like, hotel or something?
But there's gonna be some dimensional
Right.
standards that
Yeah.
are also going to, come into play that's gonna preclude. I can't see being able to meet setbacks, infrastructure separation, all the things that a site plan has to meet and have that kind of density.
Yeah.
There's also, there's
Well, yeah.
also like, there's a certain amount of lot coverage, there's a certain amount of, look at, you think about a site plan and you have to separate wells and septics and you have to, meet setbacks. And so you're gonna create a building envelope that probably isn't going to be in the business zone district. It's gonna be hard to carve out opportunities that would be able to serve that kind of,
well, and I go back to, if you're gonna do that, you have to do a conditional use permit anyway.
Right.
So why wouldn't you just do a conditional use for what you're actually trying to pull off, right?
Yeah.
And then it would just be that that's what your conditional use permit, whether we want to call them an ADU or we want to call them a group lodge or whatever it is, right? Like, I think you're still getting a conditional use permit and is it feasible for that area?
Yeah.
Well, how would we, sorry, how would we, like, I'm thinking there's a new business that could develop with this kind of difference in an opportunity, but then I started thinking about this primarily in businesses building their own employee housing. So how
How do you, they would be building multifamily on their business, which is conditionally used or, but that would be what they're doing.
If they had 5 ADUs.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to call them ADUs or attached, like, who knows how they're gonna build it, but yeah, they would be building multifamily. So that would be, if they came to Anne, she would be say, no, we're not gonna put you under an ADU classification, we're gonna put you under multifamily. Either way, you're gonna do a conditional use permit.
Okay, so what's the threshold of the number of ADUs including, so then push you to the.
So an accessory dwelling unit, I mean, by definition, you know, it is a separate unit. So like, yeah, you've got multi-units or 3 or more. So by definition, a dwelling unit is, you know, is a separate structure. It's not, oh, it can be over garage, it can be attached to the primary. But when you start, like, you know, so when you start adding on, you know, you have a structure that has multi-units, like an apartment, or, you know, you think 3 or more, we're gonna find the more applicable use table than necessarily accessory dwelling unit. But again, you know, it's still gonna go, it's gonna have the same exact outcome of the conditional use permit process. So the process, when we start talking additional beyond 2, is still gonna trigger that more vetted look at it.
I know once you go over into commercial use on property for water, you have to get authorization. There's no way,
Right.
You're gonna cover that level.
Yes, unless they're in parcel already.
Right.
And even if they are, I mean, yeah, I think you're still looking at finding the better use. And even if somebody said, no, for sure, I want to go ADU, I mean, I don't think it matters. Our requirements are still going to be the same as far as parking, infrastructure, lot size, dimensional standards, all of those, as far as whether we approve them or not, will still be same.
If that's the best conversation to have about putting them, you have to beat them up and turn them inside out and make sure that they make sense. We don't have any unintended consequences.
And you still could, but you can remember.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say amending or like with backcountry and like these and like, again, like getting into the exercise or having also the conversations of like triggering a moratorium really quick. If you see something coming in, it's like, well, this is not what we expected and way against our intentions. Like, I would love to just have more confidence as a decision-making body or bodies to pull that trigger real quick. And fix, amend something.
Right.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to add? So are we hoping to do the same thing with this one?
Yes.
Okay.
So this one, if you have any suggestions for language changes to it, the one thing that I would say is that you know, the only other, well, I think we've worked through some good discussion points. So if you have any other thoughts, comments, things that should be considered, I will make sure that they are included in the staff report for the 23rd as feedback. So everybody can discuss them at the actual hearing itself. And yeah, I think that's all I just need feedback on both of these and thoughts that I can incorporate into the staff report for the next hearing.
We work on it, yeah.
Sure. And there's one other item. There was another hearing that was set for planning for site plan review on the 23rd as well, when we heard the code amendments. And CDOT has reached out and would like more investigation done on this, because it's also not only in the scenic conservation overlay for the county, but it's also in the scenic byway on Highway 82. And so they'd like to do a little more research with the applicant. And so the applicant and I had a conversation today. So in as much as they'd really like you to open the file on the 23rd, but they they would hope for a table until the next planning commission date, so they have enough time to look at some potential options to see that.
Allows for a little bit more work session.
Yeah. I'm just gonna-
We have 14 minutes. Do we want to jump into the wild world of STRs right now? For a few minutes and then extend it to the next?
Longer than 14 minutes.
No, probably not. I think we solve it all right.
So the one thing that we did is we just looked to see how many ADUs are currently STRs, and we only have about 5 registered. So just that was my homework to bring back to the discussion on them. And so that's what we found so far.
There are a lot being built right now, though.
Right.
Right. There are a lot being built right now. And with the housing prices going up as high as they are, it's the way people can make the numbers work. And I get the nicety of saying it's yours and you live there, so you should get to do with it what you want. But I also have a hard time with ADUs being short-term rentals because I don't think they make great short-term rentals, but also, at least currently, you can still make more money long-term renting your house. And so, you know, if you're gonna have a property with an apartment, it just seems like if we're in dire need of adding housing to our Puaka, I'd rather, you know, try to push that. You know, we're talking people out of short-term rentals all the time, as far as them thinking that they're gonna come up here and make a whole bunch of money short-term renting, because still it's more it's more lucrative to long-term rent than it is to short-term rent. So the people who are typically short-term renting are your second homeowners. Or people who are like, well, my family uses this also sometimes, which I could see that's where a homeowner may want that flexibility of not having somebody in there all the time. But there are a lot of ADUs being built right now. And so I do still think that's a really valid conversation piece. And then the other idea that I threw out last time was looking at our multifamily zone, which I know we only have like 2 areas, but the biggest, a couple of those is not massive. Are those apartments in
I don't think so.
if they're in the multifamily zone? My premise behind that was there's been talk with both of those apartments in the past by previous owners, maybe even current owners, I don't know, about kind of minimizing those and selling them off as condos. And that would be devastating to lose apartments. Not that the Mount Massive apartments are super stellar, but the oh, really? Oh, I guess so, because 12 comes down.
Yeah.
I thought it skipped Mount Massive, but
There's a couple here,
Traditional residential.
okay, so it's not even for us to worry about. But my thought was that while we're discussing and going down the wild world of how do we want to continue tackling STRs, is some of those, kind of like what we did earlier tonight, is addressing some things that could be big problems right away. Is what, you know, a small bite off would be eliminating the ability to do STRs in multifamily zone districts, because that's not the intent of multifamily zoning districts. And starting with that, and also looking at considering some different language for ADUs. So those were the 2 things. I know I asked everybody last week to kind of think of some ideas that they had that we could propose as options, that whether they're STR related or not, that we could tackle in our code to help with the housing stuff. So those were the 2 things I brought forward. Did anybody else put any thoughts towards that they wanted to bring up? Any ideas?
I had a couple thoughts. I mean, one, like I was I'm trying to get my head around that idea of capping or not allowing any STRs in ADUs. And to me, I guess, I mean, it seems like what we're trying to control is like basically how many like bedrooms are like not in the local housing market. So to me, I'd rather just like do an STR cap in the county where we license sort of not by unit, but by like almost like, you know, you need to get a license for each like bedroom in your, or like, you know, right? Like if you're a 6-bedroom unit, you should sort of occupy more of the space in the cap than like an ADU.
Sure.
And like, then we don't get into micromanaging, like, is this ADU the right place for an STR or not? Like, we can kind of let people figure that out for themselves as long as the cap is achieving the purpose of trying to keep an adequate amount of local housing available.
Like a license for, not just for short-term rentals, but all available.
Well,
Is that what
no, sorry, I guess I was thinking, I mean, I don't know if we can do that. I guess I was thinking like, you know, if we go down the route of doing a short-term rental cap, I'd rather just do that and not try to get too fancy about like, well, you can't do ADU. Unless that really works, but it just seems like it would be simple. Just get the cap set at a place, but I was also thinking that what matters to me isn't like the number of short-term rentals, it's like how many bedrooms they're taking out of our local inventory.
So my only rebuttal to that will just be, and I think it's gonna be interesting to see how well it plays out in the city. As to whether they find that it's impacting enough. My experience with our owners is if they aren't getting it, they're just leaving it. They're still keeping it as a second home. They're still affording it as a second home. They afforded it without having to qualify for it. So they're still keeping it as a second home. It's just now
So
there's
it's
nobody
both.
there. And so whereas an ADU, somebody purchasing a house with an ADU, they have a very, very big intention of using that for something because it's helping for income. And so to me, that feels more impactful, but that's just coming from, you know, my perspective in dealing with this. It's just that those second, I have a hard time because I don't know that the impacts will be that big yet with the short-term rental cap. Where I think the short-term rental caps will be impactful is once short-term rentals are just as lucrative as long-term rentals, which like happened in Summit County and it's happened in other places. But our average is still 65 to 70 nights a year for short-term rentals. There are some that get much higher than that, but most are averaging at that. So you have really big shoulders September until good snow, which these days can be December. It's empty.
Yeah.
And so it's hard because until it becomes more lucrative to do short-term rentals, I don't feel like the caps can be as effective. Will it tell some second homeowners that that's not the direction we're going? For sure. And so it does send a message, it does do some of that, but I just worry that actual impact of units available. And I think that from my perspective, just dealing with it with the city was 2 years of work for what I'm guessing isn't going to be enough impact for that cap is what I worry about. Whereas I think that's what I kind of tried to bring up last week was, I think I would love to hear everybody's creative ideas of different things in the code, whether it be short-term rental oriented, whether it be code changes or process changes or whatever it is that we can incentivize more units to be available. I want to look at those, and then if we have a big list, we prioritize which ones are going to get the most bang for our buck out of. And if it's a short-term rental cap, great. But I feel like there's some other things that we could be looking at and weighing the benefits and cons to. And I just think there's lots of creative ideas that I've heard from people in the public, let alone probably in this room, that if we could just figure out some different ideas within our code and processes to incentivize those additional units to happen. that's something, you know, I mean, one thing like our company is trying to do actually is push more people in the shoulder months to offer up their houses for long-term rentals, for short-term, long-term rentals. So incentive, you know, like there's just so many things that possibly we could do. And like I said, if ultimately, you know, I'll get behind whatever, I would just love to see a big list of ideas that people may have of ways that we can try to get as many units as we can, as quickly as we can, but also reasonably, maybe not a bed and breakfast.
Well, I mean, to that, I totally get all that, and that makes sense. And yeah, I don't want to do something that doesn't actually make a difference, at least in the short term. Or yeah, but so I'm also interested in what are the legal tools we have to disincentivize vacant second homes.
Mhm.
You know, I think some communities
Yeah.
in Colorado have taken a run at that, and they haven't, from at least my very limited research, I haven't seen that win, but it hasn't been shot down legally. They just haven't got it, they haven't got voters to approve it. But like you can, my understanding is you can legally in Colorado do a flat fee, you know, on that you assess on second homeowners.
And I like that approach, or thinking about it from that approach a lot better than thinking about it from penalizing like owner occupied and year-round residents and prohibiting the use of their property if they're here, you know. Like a lot of education around two locals on that short-term rental and long-term rental comparison in reality. And I think that could be really impactful.
Jamie, go ahead.
Thanks. I don't know exactly what the mechanics are, but I know that other places definitely have a vacancy tax, or in Colorado it might have to be a fee, like you were saying, Jeff. But I don't know how you would differentiate between like a second homeowner who comes up sometimes. Is it vacant if they're here sometimes? And like, I don't know about that. I've seen them more in commercial applications, but I think there's definitely some ways to get creative about that. I'm also curious, it sounds kind of like we're talking about a lot of these options as either or, and I'm just curious procedurally, like, are these mutually exclusive? Could we just get 3 good code ideas and just bang them out all at once?
Maybe not literally all at once, but yeah, like
Well, I'm honestly asking, like, I don't understand the procedure of we come up with an idea called countywide short-term rental cap and vacancy tax. Is each one a separate whole different path, or can they kind of hang out together?
That's how much abuse we want to get in the process.
you don't take a lot of abuse once, you know.
And I guess also most of them are separate processes. It's just whether you do them simultaneously. You know, like it's not the same, just one code amendment that takes care of all of those things. It would be multiple different things that we go through. And the abuse piece is pretty big because as we've noted with lots of things that happen, there's lots of cooks that get in the kitchen when you're coming up with an idea. Well, I think about this, and then you can go down that rabbit hole for a while. And so if you're doing that with 5 different things, I just worry that we would be looking at years down the road, but maybe you build on one and then you use that to build on the next one, or with the idea that the next one is right behind it. I don't know. There's absolutely, I think there's lots of ideas there, but there would be some pros and cons again to how we want to do it. And I think that's where a list of like ideas, what do we want to see? What are some ideas we want to explore? Start exploring those with staff to really iron out what's the process, how long does the process take, what's entailed, how many details do we need to iron out and go through with the public, and what's the impact going to be, and then deciding maybe we do want to tackle 3 at a time, or maybe we're going to say this, we want to tackle this really big one. You know, who knows? But I think that's where we really need a good initial idea list of what, because we are going to, especially this summer, and then I wouldn't be surprised if it continues to be just a more consistent year-round issue where we're going to be balancing whatever it is we're working on with applications. And so it's going to become really difficult to get a whole lot, you know, similar to like backcountry that took 10 years. It's going to be difficult to get things accomplished. And so we also want to make sure we're biting off things that we can accomplish and again, are going to be impactful as soon as we can because we don't have 10 years to solve these problems. So there are lots of things we talked about before housing came to our table, and they were equally as important things, such as, you know, I think one big one that we talked about was taking a look at the land use map, deciding whether or not the zone districts are appropriate where they're at, where the density is at for them. Because we had a lot of flack with Angel View and some other proposed subdivisions. Are those accurate? Do we have those set up correctly? Are the subdivision requirements what we want them to look like? So there are lots of those things that suddenly go by the wayside if you've got one big project working. So I think it's important to like come up with a list of all the things we think the Planning Commission could be tackling that are super important for now, and then start to prioritize them with this group.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we also, you know, the board did that with staff and have a whole other list of internal priorities, which
Yeah.
would, you know, compete, I guess I would say, but, you know, just, I mean, operational thing, from operational items to special use permitting. You know, creation. So there's, that's, and that, I think, and signage,
Signage
I
is a
think
big
special
one.
use permitting is gonna be huge. So it's not addressing housing, but it's that quality of life and environmental impact and recreation impact.
Well, that's a really big thing. Like, I think one, at least for me, one really big passion I have for staying on this board is Leadville's changing really quick. And yes, we have this huge push for how do we develop more housing? How do we develop more? How do we do more? And how do we provide more? But at the end of the day, Leadville's only so big. And do we really want to develop every square mile of it? Do we want to make sure that whatever development happens is the way we want it to happen? Even if it doesn't fix everything, and also just trying to keep as much of it the reason we all live here as possible. You know, if we start to lose what we have because we're so desperate for these different developments and that's what our focus is on, then we're not protecting the assets that this county has. And so I think there's a balance there that we're in a place right now where we have to be really careful as a planning commission and board of county commissioners of like making sure that we're balancing the growth that's coming in that we can't necessarily handle very well and quality of life of living here, and how do we try to balance both of those balls. And that's where trying to come up with those priorities would be helpful. If you guys already have a list of priorities that you've talked about, and I'm sure I've seen it, but because I think we went over them as a planning commission in the very beginning, but if we have that list to maybe start with, if we emailed that list out to everybody, and then maybe that would get some juices flowing for folks. And I guess I would just urge that, yes, we think about housing because that's kind of our big crisis right now, but we also think about keeping Leadville. What are some things that we feel like with the new incoming growth that we really need to make sure we're paying attention to? Then maybe everybody could add to that, and our next meeting work session could be going through that and brainstorming even more ideas from those and trying to figure out priorities slowly from that.
That sounds really good. I just had a couple other items on the AD or on the STR that after hearing everybody talk, the one thing that I would just have you all keep in mind that whatever solution or tools that we might use for short-term rental, we have to consider compliance. We don't want to make some kind of regulation knowing right now that we are reminding staff of free. That is really hard to drive the compliance on, or it's really complicated to get the public to do what we want. So, you know, we can regulate, but then if it's really a hard policy to implement, we could fall short. So I think compliance is something we always need to keep in mind. We are taking calls, Marla's on here, and I'll probably underestimate this. We receive calls all of the time from people looking to invest in Lake County. Typically, I would say the vast majority that we take every single day are second homeowners, and they usually have a top 3 questions, and the very first one, if it's not the first, it's definitely in the top 3 is, can I short-term rent? Can we get in under any grandfathering that you have? Can we still get a license? And it's usually to defer their second home ownership. And we get those all day long. And it definitely, so the ADU thing, whether we have very many right now, it is definitely something that everybody is thinking to defer second home ownership. And then I just question, like, if someone that is an owner is supplementing or sustaining their housing by providing like a short-term rental, would it incentivize them to go to long? Could there be some kind of public service announcement that encourages and educates the advantages to long-term renting, and maybe in a financial aspect, if that's driving or sustainability for them, maybe it's creating some awareness around that and what it really, maybe 2 different examples. So anyway, those were just my 3. I'm not sure if I solved anything.
I really like those last 2 because then it's not a complicated process to actually formally change anything, but it's a campaign and really can engage the planning commissioners and others on just a broadcasting and education and trying to push.
Yeah, the compliance thing in the regulatory piece, I know, is something the city is struggling with too little. It's just so complicated that half of them don't understand, and it's really, really difficult to get the compliance piece wrapped around it, let alone even just get it implemented. And so I think that that's something that I agree. I think if we go down that path, that's where it's important to just, like we did with the other 2 tonight, is, and this is just my style too, is just try to keep it a lot more as simple as you can, but resulting in what you need it to result in, and try to do a whole lot more of incentivizing than regulating. I just seems like that's incentivizing some of our homeowners, incentivizing any of the short-term owners to rent when they're not going to use it for a long time, like doing all of that more so than saying, hey, you know what, we don't like you here, so now we're going to tax you and we're going to take away your ability to do this. It may work and it may end up being effective, but I just wonder if it's as effective as trying to reach out to most of the management companies and most of the second homeowners that we do know that are doing it and say, hey, would you consider this process instead? And creating, a housing database of they may be shorter term than 6 months, but there's something that giving people a step, So anyways, I think there's tons of ideas that we can come up with. They could be creative and at least baby steps into it, even if we do work eventually towards the more complex regulations, because we could do little baby steps. So my main request was that Anne sends out the priority list that you guys created, so that gives us a brain trigger to move along. And then from that, if you can provide Anne with any other ideas or bring them at least to the 23rd for ideas of not just housing related, but just in general, what this planning commission should be focusing on the next couple of years when we're going to see this unprecedented growth, so that we can then as a group figure out a priority list. Okay. Does that sound good for my Zoomers? Well, does anybody have anything they'd like to add? Okay.
I think we can also, like your last comments on the education and some programs, right? But we can't underestimate that. And I think because it takes so much of our capacity to do some of the regulatory things, that stuff falls to the wayside. And similar, word of mouth and your neighbors' input influence is so important and so impactful in this community especially. So I really love the idea of turning towards those ideas.
Well, and they're easier to start. It's easier to get off the
Yeah.
ground tomorrow and
Yeah.
start
Yeah.
incentivizing
And
or
then you learn.
conversing. Yeah,
Yeah. I just, powerful.
Okay, well, thanks, everybody. We only went 11 minutes over on that. That was that, we solved a lot in that amount of time. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, all in favor? Aye.
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 Thanks, everybody, for coming tonight.
Thanks. See ya.
Have a good evening.
Good night.